Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a really powerful, incredibly concentrated philosophy that, well, it completely reframes how we interact with time, progress, and our own actions. And to make this really concrete, we're going to apply this distilled concept to one of the most complex, high-stakes fields out there, a 30-year career in actuarial science and risk management. I mean, this is a profession that literally deals in decades. We're talking about managing long-tail liabilities, slow-moving systemic risks, and massive demographic shifts. In this world, time is quite literally the core variable of every single equation. So in a field built entirely on measuring the future, how you perceive the passage of time absolutely dictates your success. We're going to explore how shifting from just being a passive observer of time to becoming an active participant gives us a definitive framework for navigating these massive, multi-decade challenges. So our entire analysis today is rooted purely in this one single, profound 10-word sentence from our source material. Don't watch the clock, do what it does. Keep going. Now, when you apply this to a field like risk management, this completely stops being some generic motivational poster trope. It becomes an absolute structural necessity. Think about it. An actuary deals with projections that stretch out 30, 40, maybe even 50 years. They're building mortality tables and modeling compounding risks that will actually outlive the very people calculating them. If you sit back and just watch the clock during a 30-year career, the sheer magnitude of that time horizon will completely paralyze you. In this context, keeping going is the required methodology for survival. So we're going to break down exactly what this means, phase by phase, and see how these three short phrases provide a complete blueprint for sustaining momentum through the longest, most complex projects imaginable.
All right, part one, the trap of observation. Let's dive right into why the simple act of watching time creates an inherent trap of stagnation.
Our source material sets up this really stark dichotomy between the paralyzing stagnation of merely watching versus the dynamic forward motion of actually doing. When we look at risk management, watching represents this incredibly dangerous trap of obsessing over daily market fluctuations, short-term variance, or panicking over immediate data noise. It's basically the act of passively waiting and just absorbing the stress of the moment. That builds anxiety and completely stops progress. Doing, on the flip side, represents the seasoned actuary who is actively building and refining robust 30-year risk models designed specifically to weather those exact daily storms. That is active engagement. That's true momentum. The text urges us to cross that chasm. You simply cannot let the daily ticking of the clock distract you from the decades-long trajectory you're actively trying to construct.
Because, you see, watching in this framework is a state of severe paralysis. In predictive modeling, this shows up as extreme analysis paralysis. Picture an actuary who is just completely frozen by the sheer overwhelming volume of variables in a new predictive model. They end up substituting the actual methodical work of long-term planning for the immediate anxiety of short-term observation. So you aren't building the model, you aren't running the simulations, you literally aren't moving forward. You're just witnessing time evaporate while drowning in data. You can't simultaneously be a passive observer of short-term variance and an active generator of long-term momentum. You have to choose one. So the mandate to stop watching is really a mandate to stop letting the measurement of time drain the energy you need to execute the task within it.
Moving into part two, do what it does. Let's examine how the mechanical mandate of a clock actually provides an active solution.
We can actually deconstruct this philosophy into three distinct mechanical phases, shifting us out of that static state and into a rhythm of perpetual emulation. Think about applying this directly to the life cycle of a massive risk management project, say pricing a revolutionary new insurance product or managing a multi-billion-dollar pension fund. Step one is breaking the habit of observation. That means stopping the immediate panic over this quarter's economic reports. Step two is adopting the methodical, unyielding math of probability, literally taking on the characteristics of the clock itself. And step three is sustaining that model through the inevitable economic downturns, regulatory overhauls, and market crashes that are for sure going to happen over the ensuing decades. But to successfully pull off that middle step, we really need to understand exactly how the mechanics we're emulating actually behave. And here's the key. A clock moves continuously and entirely unemotionally. That is the precise behavior the source urges us to emulate. Steady, unemotional pacing is the exact temperament required of, say, a chief risk officer. When a massive financial crisis hits, the clock doesn't panic, and neither does a seasoned actuary. They rely on continuous progression. They update those incredibly complex Monte Carlo simulations, they recalibrate the mortality tables, and they just unemotionally process the new chaotic data. There are no backward steps here, right? Only recalibrations moving forward. And finally, there's an absolute disregard for observation. A clock does its job regardless of who's watching, and a 30-year risk model has to function regardless of the daily panics of shareholders or the media. It just ticks on, totally unaffected by external anxiety.
Which brings us to part 3, the mandate of momentum. Here is where we bring the entire philosophy together into a decisive call for unyielding forward motion.
Keep going. These two words serve as the ultimate takeaway and the final necessary phase of emulating that continuous action. And let's ground this in the gritty reality of a really exhausting career. Actuarial science isn't always glamorous, It's often this grueling marathon of endless data validation, incredibly tedious regulatory compliance, and mind-bendingly complex mathematics. When a massive projection project takes 3 full years just to launch, or when sudden legislative changes completely upend the risk models you literally just spent a decade perfecting, you have to strip away the frustration. You strip away all the excuses. You just keep going. This is the rhythm of the clock translated into human action. You don't need daily inspiration to update a massive spreadsheet, and you don't need a motivational speech to validate a dataset. You just need that relentless, ticking progression of putting one foot in front of the other.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really powerful metaphor merging time and risk. Which role are you choosing to play in the passage of your own time? Are you going to be dictated by short-term variance, sitting on the sidelines, anxiously charting the daily ticking of the clock as the hours just slip away? Or are you going to be the driver of the long-term trend line? Are you the unemotional, continuous driver of your own momentum, focused entirely on building the robust models of your life and career rather than obsessing over the immediate measurements? Break the trap of observation, adopt the unemotional mechanics of momentum, and honestly, whatever you are building right now, just keep going.